In this demo, we'll look at configuring firewall rules and other firewall features on our network security appliance. We're already logged into the security appliance configuration utility in Internet Explorer as our admin user, and we're on the Getting Started page. We'll go first to the Advanced Getting Started page where we find a checklist for the firewall and NAT rules. The checklist lists the typical things that you would want to configure when configuring firewall rules. If you'll notice, configure custom services, configure schedules, and configure the actual firewall and NAT rules. First, we'll take a look at configuring custom services. The network security appliance has a list of all of the typical services that you would allow in and out of the firewall. But if for some reason you have a service that's not one of the typical services, you can add a service that is custom. And in this case, I've added a service called My Service. We take a look at this. We can give it a different type. It's either TCP, UDP, ICMP types, and a specific port range. In this case, it's one port. So you list it both in the start port and the finish port to give it one port. So that's the idea of custom services. You can actually create a service which will be allowed through the firewall, and we'll show you where that shows up in the list of services later. The next piece in the checklist was schedules. You can create a custom schedule that you could use to apply to the firewall or have the firewall rules applied to this schedule. In this case, I've created a schedule called Business, which is intended to represent the business days of the week. So specific days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And that's the specific schedule that I've created. You can create other schedules for allowing traffic in and out of the firewall on weekends or different days as appropriate for your organization and the security policies that you may have. Next, let's take a look at the default outbound policies. The firewall on the network security appliance that we're using, the default policy is to allow all traffic out and to block all traffic coming in. From the WAN to the secure side of the network, all traffic is blocked unless we create a specific rule that will allow that traffic. Now, we can also change the default policy by toggling here from allow always to block always, but we'll go ahead and stay with allow always. And then let's take a look at the IPv4 rules. A typical rule that we may want to create would block a service from inside to the outside. So for example, let's go ahead and click add. We may want to create a firewall rule that will prevent people from using an external email server, an external SMTP server. So in this case, from the secure side of the LAN to the unsecure side outside, we want to block the SMTP service. So let's look at SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. We'll go ahead and block that. And in this case, we'll block it by schedule and choose our business schedule that we created. So during business hours, we don't want anybody using an outside mail server for sending their mail. We can choose which host this apply to on the inside, a single address or an address range. In this case, we'll just choose all hosts or any. We can also choose the destination machines that this applies to. In this case, we'll select any also. So we'll go ahead and click apply to create this rule, which secures traffic to an SMTP server external to our organization. In this case, we've prevented that traffic. So from our LAN to the WAN, we've prevented any SMTP traffic during the scheduled days that we have. So let's create another firewall rule. Another typical firewall rule that you would create would allow traffic in. In this case, we have a web server in our DMZ. So we'll go ahead and allow traffic from the unsecure network or the outside, the WAN side, to our DMZ. And the type of service that we would like to enable is HTTP. Now, while we're here on this screen, we'll also show you that if we click on service and scroll down to the very bottom, you'll see the custom service that we created, My Service. Let's bring the page back down now. All right, so we want to go ahead and select the HTTP service. We're going to allow HTTP traffic into our web server. We're going to allow that always. We'll allow it from any host that's out there on the network. And the one thing that we do have to specify in addition for this particular rule is we need to specify the server that's hosting the service. So 172.16.2.100 is the server that's hosting that service. In this case, we can also specify if we want to forward the port. So HTTP traffic will come in on port 80, but let's suppose that our server that's internal to our network is hosting the web server on port 8080 instead. Another thing that we can choose is which external IP address is being represented here and which external IP address we're going to be accepting this traffic on. In our case, we have the dedicated WAN interface, which is 5.1, but we've also created aliases on 5.2 and 5.3, and we'll go ahead and select 5.1 as our interface for this rule. All right, now that we've created a rule that allows traffic for HTTP, we may also want to have a rule that allows traffic for HTTPS. So the same thing, we'll accept traffic from the unsecure network to the DMZ on the HTTPS protocol. We're going to allow that, and we'll allow that from any host. But once again, we have to specify the server, 172.16.2.100, and we'll go ahead and keep the default port for that instead of forwarding the port to a different port number. Go ahead and click apply. And one final rule that we may want to add is to allow our machines that are inside of our network to be able to manage the servers that are in the DMZ. So we'll go ahead and add one more rule. And this rule is going to go from our secure LAN inside of our network to the DMZ. And we're going to allow any traffic to go out to the DMZ at any time so that the machines that are on our private network to get to the servers that are in the DMZ network for management of those machines. And so we'll go ahead and click apply. All right, we have 4 firewall rules that we've created. If for some reason one of these firewall rules was more important or took priority over another, you can also select these firewall rules and move them up or down. So we've created 4 good firewall rules that will allow our web server, which is in the DMZ, to be accessed from the outside world. We can manage our servers from inside the network, and we can also block services that we don't want people using from inside the network on the outside network. One of the other things that's important about the NSA firewall is it has the ability to look for specific attacks and block those. In this case, we'll look at attacks, and some of the attack checks that the firewall has built into it in this case, for WAN security checks, we can actually block the ability to ping the WAN interface. So our 5.1 interface that I mentioned, or the 5.2 or 5.3, those aliases, we can tell it, don't let people ping that and be able to see that. We can enable a stealth mode. We can block TCP floods. You'll notice some of the other pieces here. We can block ICMP notifications. We can block fragmented packets. And we even have the ability to detect a SYN attack. We'll go ahead and click apply to save those changes. All right, that succeeded. The next piece of the firewall and what it has the ability to do is to actually block content or provide content filtering. Now, our network security appliance also has a subscription content filtering service, which categorizes URLs, and you can block URLs by time of day and category. In this case, you have the ability to block specific URLs that you've determined you don't want to have, or approved URLs that you want to be able to allow. And so by providing keywords or specific URLs, you could block content specifically aside from the subscription service that you have. Now also, MAC filtering features are provided on the firewall. So if you want to allow only certain MAC addresses to be able to connect to the NSA, in this case, policy for MAC addresses, we have MAC address filtering enabled already. You have the ability to choose either block and permit the rest, which means we're going to block the MAC addresses listed and we'll allow the rest. So if you have a particular machine that you don't want to connect, but you want to allow everybody else, that works. Typically, that's a little harder to manage. It's a lot easier if you want to maintain a very secure network to permit only those machines that you want to connect and block the rest. So you also have the ability to associate an IP address with a MAC address. This is intended to prevent spoofing. So if you know a particular MAC address always uses a particular IP address, you can specify those associations and block spoofing attacks. The firewall also has the ability to set certain session settings. The maximum half-open sessions is a typical type of setting that allows you to prevent SYN attacks. You can prevent the SYN packets from overwhelming the server and taking up all of the connections. So those are some of the features of the firewall on the network security appliance. Specifically in this demo, we created IPv4 firewall rules to allow traffic into our DMZ for the web server, to prevent traffic out for certain services like SMTP that we don't want people to use. And we also allowed traffic from our LAN to go to the DMZ to manage those servers.